people if you like always be out there and doing stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. We were involved in staff. Do you have to help you with in the lead up?
Well, we have our entire development team. So I do events and community engagement, right? And then we have Rick, he's the general manager. So he's doing sponsorships.
Yeah.
And I'm doing the event planning.
Jessica, can you hear us? Okay?
Jessica part-time, so she helps and plugs in wherever she needs to. So it's good.
Okay, great. I think we will get started with this meeting. We'll call the Business Innovation and Public Affairs Advisory Committee to order at 10 a.m. We have a adoption of the agenda. Would someone like to move the agenda be adopted? Moved by I wanted to call you director. Moved by Dawn, seconded by Arsh. No, I was thinking Councillor or Dawn or what's her role? So, all in
Sir Don. Yeah.
anyone opposed to that? That's carried. Adoption of the minutes from February 20th. I'd like to move that those be adopted. Moved by Craig here, seconded online by Craig as well. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And we're going to move right over into reports. Item 6.1 is the development application process review. And we have Mark Neal and Alan Nielsen.
Great.
With us.
Thank you, Chair. Just thank you for having us today. As many of you know, over the past year or so, we've undertaken a review of our development application processes. And this was done in light of new legislation and motivated by being more efficient and effective with our processes. This work was done by an external consultant to bring an external perspective on things and to bring best practices from other parts of the province. So we engaged Alan Nielsen. Mr. Nielsen has done this type of work elsewhere in the province and has extensive experience in reviewing municipal processes. And so he's bringing that perspective and expertise to the table for us today. So today is about sharing Alan's work. He's now arrived at a conclusion with a report and some findings and recommendations. And today we want to share that with the committee and certainly open to any questions or comments from the committee on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Nielsen. I should also say that online is Sherry First, who has assisted Alan in his work. We can't see her now, but she is online and also available for questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neal. And thank you, Chair and committee members, for having me here today, and my colleague Sherry, who, as Mark mentioned, is online. You may recall that we came to the committee some time ago to introduce the study and get some early feedback and input from the committee. We've now, as Mark has said, have had a chance to do our work, to confer with staff on many occasions, to meet with members of the development community and other applicants of city processes, to speak with council, and now to come back to this committee. We'll also speak with another city committee, and then we'll be wrapping up our report. We've got we've got the entire draft report done at least, and we look forward to bringing it forward to council in May as a final report. Mark mentioned we're going to move fairly quickly, because I know you have a fairly involved agenda today, but wanted to talk very briefly about the purpose and the scope of the review. We'll talk about the approach taken in the current system, but we're really going to focus our presentation today on the opportunities for change and the recommendations that speak to those opportunities for change. When we think about the purpose and scope, we've got the main purpose really is to identify opportunities to strengthen the development approval process. When we think about development approval process, it is the process or set of processes that applicants for development, anybody with a development application that needs to get city approval, goes through in order to have it reviewed against city bylaws, against city policies, against standards and works of services and all those kinds of things, and then ultimately approved. We always want to make sure that we are moving very quickly through the development approval process as quickly as we can, so that we can have good, progressive, the type of development, quality development here in Abbotsford, and we can do that in a way that is as expedited as possible. This report really reflects the commitment the city has to looking at its business processes and to continuing to improve those processes. And as Mark mentioned, the context in which we are operating is important to highlight. It is one in which there's a great, as you will know, a housing crisis, a lot of attention on housing and on moving development through quickly so that we can meet demands of the community and the requirements as well as a provincial government, but also of the expectations of our own city council. We have a number of objectives that we've looked at in doing the review. One was speed, which is the speed of reviewing and improving developments, applications. One is efficiency, how well we're using our resources, measuring, are we looking at targets on how we're tracking applications, are we reporting out on those? Customer experience, we always want to maximize or optimize the experience that people have working with the city. And in this case, developers and applicants for development approval. Transparency, very important to have transparency though, so that applicants understand where they are in the system, what's required, how decisions are made, the basis of those decisions. And then clarity and predictability, clarity and roles, not only for applicants, but also for city staff who are involved in the process, and predictability so that people who interact with the city understand and can predict what it is they need to do in order to move through the system. The opposite of predictability would be arbitrariness, perhaps, or lack of predictability. We want to avoid those things whenever we can.
We're not talking about the US politics, right?
That's true. Yes. Actually, that is strangely predictable.
Yeah.
So the scope, really, we are looking at all of the different processes that are followed to review and approve the key land use plan or development planning types of applications. Everything from OCP amendments to rezoning, development variances, development permits, agricultural permits, and subdivision approval as well. We think about those processes, but we're really thinking not only about the processes, but the structure around those processes. So we like to kind of almost refer to these types of reviews as reviews of the development function at the city, which involves and is centered around the processes, but also involves everybody, includes everybody who's involved in those processes. And we've got two groups in particular, planning and development services and development engineering. The approach, we followed our fairly robust work plan. We did a lot of interviews. We looked at best practices, a lot of consultation with developers and industry professionals, our two committees here and so forth, back to council. We're now at the point where we're ready to take the report to council. I won't spend much time on the current system, but when you go through the report, once it's provided, we're just doing an overview of it right now, but once the full document's provided, you'll see there's a fairly detailed chapter right in the beginning, which outlines what it is the system includes, what's entailed, and what is included in the system of reviewing applications for development and how it works, in other words, how we're set up right now. We do that for two reasons. One, because we want to provide information to people who may not be aware, the broader community and others who may not be fully understand how we are structured to and what we do in development approvals. But we also do it because before we can think about changes we want to make, we need to really understand what we have in place. So that's why we provide quite a bit of detail of what is in place today. We look at the purpose of the function. We look at the legislative framework, both at the provincial and municipal level. We look at staffing, where our resources are and how we use those. We look at the different processes that make up the function. We look at the technology we use because that's increasingly important. And we look at how we provide information and guidance to applicants. Finally, the statistics, which, as you can imagine, over the last several years have shown growth, more growth, and more growth. And when we look ahead, we're anticipating growth. So that's important as part of the context. Opportunities. So when we look at these different, when we go through the system, we assess what it is we have in place today and how we may wish to make some changes to capture different opportunities for improvement, to meet our objectives, speed, efficiency, transparency, all of those objectives. We come up with a number of different areas of focus. One is development inquiry meetings, and I'll just mention them here, and then we're going to jump into the recommendations. I'll speak about these in more detail because all of the recommendations correspond to these different opportunities. Development inquiry meetings, those are the meetings that we have before applications are submitted to help people understand our system and to help them understand what's required of them and do they wish then to proceed to an application. File management, once applications are made, how do we get them into the system and how do we sign them so that they can be reviewed in an expedited way? Application tracking, once applications are in, how do we keep track of where they are in the system, not just for our own purposes, but also for applicants so they can see where it is in the system. Target timelines. What can people expect in terms of timelines? And recognizing there's a good portion of that is going to be dependent on the applicants themselves and the materials and the speed at which they provide those materials to us. But we also have our own targets that we want to be thinking about. Our development application review team, this is the interdepartmental team that comes together once a week to put their heads together and review and discuss applications that come into the system. And so we want, that's a best practice, but we've come up with some ideas on how we think we can make it even better. Streaming applications. Right now, like many cities, we have what's called a first in, first out system, where if you put an application in, you can be assured that it's going to be reviewed in the queue, in its place in the queue. That's great, and it's very equitable in some senses, or equal at least, but it also presumes that every application is equally valuable to the community, when in fact, that's not the case. We want to identify which applications are most valuable to the community and expedite those in a different stream, not to ignore the others, but just to separate them out so we can give extra attention to those. Review letters, when we take applications, we review the applications, and then we as a city bring together the different views and the different information and requirements from all of the different departments involved, and we issue a review letter. So the applicant gets one letter from the city that explains exactly what's good and what needs fixing in the application. We've got some ideas on how to make that process a little bit better. Delegation of authority. Historically, councils have always given and been required to give authority to authorize different types of permit applications. In some cases, that will remain. Rezoning, for example, that's a council decision. Other types of applications, other types of approvals can increasingly be given by staff in the system, senior staff in the system. Abbotsford has gone some way towards delegating authority over different kinds of permits and approvals. We think that there's scope. In fact, there is now legal scope to go a little bit further, and we're recommending that. Authority of file managers, when something comes into the system, it's assigned to an individual, and that individual becomes the file manager. He or she's a planner typically, and that planner then is responsible for, as the single point of contact, for getting all of the referral comments from other departments and outside of the organization as well, bringing it all together and communicating back to the applicant. We want to ensure that those file managers are positioned for success and have the authority they need to so they can make decisions and move things forward quickly. Templates and professional reliance. We want to ensure that all of the technical studies that come forward in support of applications meet a certain standard. That's not always the case. Consulting, just like every other profession, has really good people and people who need a little bit more help. We want to deal with that. We want to eliminate incidents at which things that come into the city just don't meet the standards, because when that happens, everything slows down. So how can we ensure that we're giving the tools and also holding people accountable who are submitting materials to the city? Technology, we've got a system in place. We're upgrading the system. We want to get it to the point where we can accept things through portals. We can have technology do a lot of the work for us. And then finally, internal support. How do we ensure that staff at all levels get the tools they need to start making judgment calls or making more judgment calls with confidence so that we don't have to refer things up the ladder? Because when we do that, even though it's always going to be necessary in some cases, when we do it in too many cases, we slow down. I talked about planning and development services. We've also got development engineering, and fewer opportunities in here because it's a smaller group and they have a much more focused role. But we want to look at the role and the authority. When we think about development, when we think of engineering as a group, and the city is called Engineering and Regional Utilities, we have different divisions within that department. We have transportation, we have utilities, we have operations, we have development engineering. I'm speaking in generic terms to some degree, but you get the sense. Development engineering, its role is to represent the department as a whole in reviewing applications for development. Engineers in those other groups have different responsibilities. The responsibility for reviewing on behalf of the whole department applications for development rests with development engineering. Often in cities, and we see this in Abbotsford, we use development engineering more as a portal to the engineering department, and everything gets fanned out to the engineering department. We're saying that's not necessary in most cases. We can deal with it. We can stop it at development engineering, let those folks do their job, get it back to the applicant. There will be cases where we need to involve others from other parts of engineering. There will always be cases because we have particularly complex applications or with unique works and services, those kinds of things. Use people selectively for those experts selectively where we need their input. Where we can, however, focus on the role of development engineering, give them the authority to play that role. Late hits, sometimes what we see is in cities, we see requirements being provided by works and services requirements being issued to the applicant. And there's always an attempt to ensure that those are definitive and comprehensive. Sometimes things are missed, sometimes late hits come in. That is further requirements that need to be added. Those can be really destabilizing to development because they're costly, they introduce uncertainty and so forth. We want policies in place that really limit those to health and safety matters. Development and servicing agreements, typically in most municipalities, when you make an application or a complex application for development, you will get a servicing agreement, which tells you all of the offsite services that you need to provide in support of that application, in support of that proposed development. The servicing agreement can be very detailed, requires a lot of cost on the part of the developer, requires a lot of information to be provided. In Abbotsford, in an attempt to, for very noble reasons, to enhance customer service, a division was made some time ago to say, let's have servicing agreements towards the end of the process as they get closer to building. Let's have development agreements earlier, which are far less onerous on the developer. That's okay. The difficulty, however, is what it does is it means that we don't get the information we need at the front end to avoid late hits. It also means that developers who are simply seeking to get to rezoning and sit on their land and not develop it can do it for much less cost and can do it fairly quickly if it's only a development agreement as opposed to a servicing agreement. So we're suggesting that we follow the lead of many other municipalities and say we're going to replace those two with just one servicing agreement earlier in the system so that we know if you're a serious developer, you have put the funds in to do that. And then application quality, we want to ensure that all of the studies and the applications that come forward meet that standard. And we've got some tools and our recommendations to deal with that. I talked, Madam Chair, about the recommendations and how they all relate back to these opportunities that I've noted. The first relates to the development inquiry meetings. We've suggested that the city amend its procedure bylaw to include a requirement for a more formal pre-application meeting. Right now, our development information meeting is free of charge. Anybody who wants to find out about development at the city of Abbotsford can request a meeting. Staff have to be taken out of their regular duties, attend the meeting, learn about the thing, give information back. They take an average of an hour and they can be very disruptive. They're going to be important in some cases where they still need to be done. Charge a modest fee as a small barrier to ensure that people who request the meetings are actually a little bit serious about developing. And those who don't want to pay that can get all the information they need online through our written materials as well. But where there is a bona fide, serious, soon-to-be application, have a structured pre-application meeting where information is provided ahead of time. Professionals from the different departments, staff from the departments are brought to the meeting, have read the materials, can provide feedback, can really help that applicant understand what they need to provide in order to succeed through the process and get their development in place. Have a robust fee attached to that, but have that as a credit that can be then credited back to the overall application fee, provided the application proceeds within 6 months of the meeting. Following the lead here of some best practices places, which have really found that by putting these opportunities in here, these tools in here, and these barriers, which are temporary in some sense because we get a credit, we can really focus our attention on those bona fide development applications that lead to good development. File management, we want to ensure that we have, once an application has been accepted as complete by the city, we want that application in the hands of a file manager within a couple of weeks. So that requires a few changes on how we currently receive, set up, and assign files right now. Application tracking, we want to ensure that we are enhancing transparency. We are enhancing accountability as well of for ourselves. We want to reduce the time spent responding to inquiries that come in on where's my application in the system. So let's harness our technology as we continue to improve it, and let's put in place tracking mechanisms so that not only can we understand where things are in the system, but applicants can. And they have a sense as well as to what the next milestone is and how long they can expect. all of that speaks, by the way, to this idea of certainty, because while speed is of the essence, certainty is equally important. In fact, when we talk to some developers, we say, if you had to choose between speed or certainty, which would you choose? And it's certainty, because if I know exactly, I would rather know it's going to be a year. Don't tell me 6 months if it's going to be a year, because then I can organize my trades and my consultants, I can get my financing in place, and I'm good to go. Target timelines. We also want to be a little bit cautious on setting targets, particularly the ones that are overly ambitious, but where we can set targets and where we can be a little bit ambitious and stretch ourselves a bit, we want to set those, because they do then provide a sense to applicants of what they can expect. And most importantly, we want to report back on that. We want to publish those findings every year and how we're doing on that performance. And then ultimately, and hopefully even start to revise those targets and revise them downward in terms of time as we go through this, as we proceed. I talked about our development application review team as being that interdepartmental forum and being that best practice. Right now it is, and it is a best practice. It's been emulated by several other places. They've taken Abbotsford's example and they've used it in their own places. We can now kind of learn from some of those places as well and learn from our own lessons too on how to make this a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient. Limit the number of applications, the types of applications that go to this forum, make them the more complex applications. The smaller, less complex applications we can deal with in other forms. We can deal with the file manager having discussions with one or two other individuals from other referral agencies or referral departments. But use this DART meeting, this interdepartmental group, as a place where people with the authority to make decisions can come, talk about different requirements that different departments have, reach compromises, look at trade-offs, and issue one response back to the applicant. Streaming applications, I talked about that first in, first out. We want to change that a little bit. We want to identify, first of all, some criteria for determining which are the more important applications from the perspective of council, for the community, and find a different track to deal with those ones. On the review letters, I talked about the review letter. When we look at review letters, the file manager is responsible for gathering all of the input from the different departments that look at a file, bringing that together and issuing a single review letter. We want to ensure that that single review letter is comprehensive but clear, and that it is the last word, the first and last word to the developer whenever possible. So we don't have iterations of review letters, because every time we send a new amended review letter, we're introducing new things that can create a problem for applicants. With review letters as well, we want to encourage, because when we have everything as one letter, when we endeavor to be comprehensive and make sure we've captured everything, we can add to the time a little bit. So given that, let's encourage our file managers to say, because they're in contact with applicants, there's phone calls with applicants all the time. Let's say, we understand that it's going to take a little bit of time for this review letter to be finalized. In the meantime, however, we can tell you, we know certain things are going to be in that letter. You may want to get started on those. So really make it more very friendly, customer friendly for the applicants in that sense. And that's going to require some judgment on the part of the file managers, and they'll develop that judgment in consultation with their own managers as well, because we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're verbally giving encouragement to do something that then puts us at risk. Delegation of authority, I talked about that. We're suggesting that the city maximize its development of approval authority to staff, templates, and professional reliance, that we provide all the tools we can for consultants and others working for applicants to ensure that technical reports are of a certain quality. And we also have suggested that where we don't have that quality, or where we don't have confidence in something, we give ourselves the authority, which we're entitled to require peer reviews. And those will be paid for by the applicant. Those are used sparingly. They're a stick. We never like to use sticks, but sometimes they're necessary. Development engineering recommendations, fewer recommendations here, so I'll just plow through, Madam Chair, if I could. So when we look at the role of the authority, so I talked a little bit about this already, we want to strengthen the role of development engineering as that gatekeeper, as that body that is solely responsible for leading, not just coordinating, the review of engineering on behalf of the department. We also want to recognize that there are going to be times when development engineering wish, and in other times when they must, or they should, reach out to experts, to professionals, to professional engineers in other parts of the engineering department to get information, to get feedback, to get some guidance. And we want to make sure that happens, but we want to recognize that that happens fewer times rather than more times. And so we put together a protocol agreement within the engineering department to identify exactly when development engineering passes on those files to others and when it doesn't. Late hits policy, we've talked about creating a late hits policy so that we don't impose additional demand on developers. That will be aided by having that service agreement, replacing the development and servicing agreement. So having everything up front, so we have a sense of, we get to see what has been submitted for all the servicing, and we can deal with that and not have to go back later if things come in later in the system. Madam Chair, I will end there, and I apologize for moving you through quickly, but I know that you've got a tight agenda today. And I'll pass it back to Mr. Neal. I think he's going to talk a little about next steps.
Following questions.
Following questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, open it up to questions. This is a lot of information.
Yes.
Is it a fire hose? Was that?
Yes, exactly.
Felt it.
For comments, of course, so. Just to start.
I really liked how applicants will get one review letter, right? And they'll outline everything, what they need to fix, what's good, what's bad, because there's so many chances where, yes, wait times are longer. And then there's one thing said, a couple months later, then there's something else. And then they're already annoyed because it's taking longer than expected. And then there's so many different things coming, right? All different times. So yeah, one letter, one thing, everybody knows what they have to work on and they get their status. That's amazing.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Jared.
With the streaming applications, was there, like the level of priority you said that's usually set by council? So would that affect the like types of, my concern is that you just have some applications that would always be getting bounced to the bottom because like, oh, it's not high priority, but is there like a minimum, a maximum, you'd be like, it's priority, but if you're on there for 6 months, that puts you like higher up or something.
Very good question. So a couple of ways we can deal with that. One is, and the intent of this section is not to say what's priority, that gets the attention, everything else like far back burner. It's more, everything is important. The suite of recommendations ensures that everything moves through at a faster pace, perhaps than we've been able to in the past. That said, let's look at some specific types of applications that are even more important than everything else. And let's give some extra attention to those, but not to the extent that we're delaying everything else. That's really important too. And in terms of setting the priorities, we look to council as the elected body to identify what's important for the community. Council views are going to be informed by provincial legislation, the province, and when we look at housing targets, for example, but they're also going to be informed primarily by the community. And communities like this that are interested in economic development for the community. Like what is going to be most important? What's going to give the biggest bang for the buck to the community to create the community that we're envisioned as a community? And I think then when we look at we talked earlier about targets as well, just to bring that into this part of the conversation. All of the different applications, we would look to have targets for all of the different categories of applications. So even the ones that weren't quote unquote priority, or we don't like to use the word fast track because it implies everything else is slow track, but that's in a sense.
Track's only so advantage.
But everything is in one stream would have its targets based on criteria, based on what's important to the community. Everything in the other stream would still have a target. And we would report out on that. So there'd be accountability and transparency there too. Sure.
It's a great question on the streaming. Right now, as pointed out, it's one queue. It's in the door. It's first in, first out. We did this with our building department and the review process there as well, where we created 4 streams. And the intent of that was, yes, the more complex applications can go to the more senior staff and those can move quickly. But to answer your question, Jared, directly, it's not intended to say the rest are slow and deprioritized. In fact, it's quite the opposite in the building department. So if you're doing a deck addition, for example, you're not stuck behind a 300-unit complex multifamily development. It's in a different stream, and it can go quicker actually. And that's sort of the same mindset here for this as well. So if you're doing a simple development permit, and that track can move at a different pace than the more complex ones that are a little more involved and has a little more thinking around it. Because a lot of times those smaller ones are getting stuck behind those larger complex projects, and it's really not a good practice. So yes, prioritize for sure, but doesn't mean prioritizing the other ones. It's simply a different stream.
Oh,
Well, I have a lot of questions today, so that answered that one, so let's.
I was gonna follow up on your question, so.
Dawn, and then over to Craig question.
So follow up on that is, we were speaking number 5 or 6 was transparency.
Yes.
So will I, before I submit, know if I'm going into track 1 or track 2? I think that would be helpful but difficult for on your side.
Certainly.
Yes.
Yeah, but it provides me the finance certainty, the sales certainty that, it's
Sure.
that kind of idea. So question is, will I know? And also on the dark meetings. Before I submit, will I know whether I'm going to go through a dark process or a non-dark process?
On the first, if I can
Sure,
answer.
please.
Sure, thanks. On the first question, I would anticipate, and keep in mind, my job is to put
Yes.
forward the recommendation. So
Up to these guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if the city were to consider and
Yeah.
endorse that recommendation, I would anticipate that the city would be very clear and transparent, as per the transparency objective, on the tracks and why one track moves as priority and why the other track is the normal track, whatever we want to call it. I would anticipate that. I would the small risk in doing that is you get places saying, we're going to kind of amend ours to fit in here.
Yeah.
However, I think if we can create the tracks in such a way that to, if not eliminate, certainly mitigate that risk. Because if you say, just for the sake of argument, council says, we are going to treat as priority rental housing. Well, if you're building strata, you're not going to just change the rental to get in this track because your whole business model is on strata. So that would kind of eliminate that risk. So yes, I would expect that you would highlight that. Now, I would expect actually council would be proud of kind of saying, this is priority, we're going to expedite this. Now the second question, and I'm sorry, remind me. Dart, thank you. When we have our pre-application meetings, I would anticipate that, and remember that DART is primarily an internal process. So it's less visible to the public. It's more that this is the way, when I'm making an application as an applicant, I know that different departments are going to have a look at that and give their views on that. The city has simply said that at the back end, internally, we're going to do that in an efficient way by getting everybody around the same table. I would guess, and I think this happens already, that in some of our, what are now development inquiry meetings, but also in the future pre-application meetings, that staff would be meeting with an applicant who's a serious applicant and said, if this goes forward, we would bring together our interdepartmental group. Yes.
So it's not a checkbox, and okay, so I can adjust myself accordingly.
That's right.
That was my concern.
You got
That
it.
People would
No.
adjust their.
Yeah, no, you got it. You got it. Yes. And I wonder, Madam Sheriff, I'm just going to also just invite my colleague Sherry online just because she's joined us online. I don't want to, Sherry, let me just give you a blanket invitation. If you wish to add to anything I said, or more importantly, correct anything I've said, please do so. I would say Sherry is the brains of the operation. So yes. No, I think just in general, yeah, go ahead.
By the smile though, there were 2 or 3 things.
Yes. Get a list together. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, but I don't, we can ping pong back and forth as well.
We'll go to Craig
Craig,
first and
okay,
then we'll
well,
go around the table.
Yeah, and mine's a follow-up on the same thread before we jump to something else. So is it safe to say that the priority queue would be greatly influenced by the OCP? So if you're bringing applications forward, so congruent with that, and then further to that, could it be possible to develop a set of principles that would help people understand what the influencing factors of being in one stream or the other? Because I think the rules of engagement would be nice to know ahead of time before you find out, oh, well, if I would have done this and approached it differently, then, only I knew.
Yes. Thank you for those questions through the chair. So the first question with respect to the OCP as the master policy document for the city is going to your point, inform all of the different decisions the council makes on behalf of the community. So I would think that would be a good place in which to base decisions on what's considered priority by council. There'll be other influences as well, though. There'll be provincial legislation, as I mentioned. There'll be events that arise or economic opportunities, those kinds of things. But OCP certainly is a key policy basis for that. On on the transparency or the principles that could be provided. I think that you certainly could provide those principles. I think that when we're thinking about the streams, however, they're going to be more on the types of development. The kind of the quality of the application is going to be, I think, where we look at the principles. So if you can create a development that promotes this, that promotes that meets these standards, those kinds of things, irrespective of what stream you're in, it's going to go faster for you. And we communicate those publicly, but also in our pre-application meetings, so that everybody has a very clear sense on what their success factors are going to be going forward.
Fair enough. And just to follow up to your point, I think you said the comment. So say, for example, we're focusing more on residential.
Yeah.
That would be a really important principle to understand. While we have this big OCP right now, because of legislation, whatever influencing factor, right now, we're really looking for this type of development.
100%.
And
Yeah.
the public knowing that's a bit of a decision.
Yeah.
Would be helpful.
That's a really good point. And we can look to a parallel and forgive me, I don't know if the city of Abbotsford has actually created this other tool about what to talk about and what the cities have, but there is a tool, and you would know about it coming from the chamber. There's a tool of revitalization tax exemptions. And those are tools that basically say that we as a community have decided, council speaking on behalf of the community, that development, investment in a particular part of town, geographically defined, is going to be treated as priority. So those kinds of principles as well, I think we can use that as a something to a lesson for this type of streaming as well.
Very informative. Yeah. So geographic and style.
It could be whatever, yeah, and I don't want to preclude
No,
anything, but it could be all those kinds.
Yeah, I wasn't hearing geographic, so that's good.
One area could potentially be things that are on council strategic plan.
Absolutely.
That we want
Yeah.
to accomplish, that perhaps there's something that would normally a lot longer, but
Yes, really good point. Yeah, excellent point.
any questions online? I'll go around the room in here again. Don't see any, but you can raise your hand up there. We can see you guys. So, Jared.
Well, mine is just that, like, with a priority stream with that, like, I understand the concept of it. It's great to say it, but when you're working on a file and it's not priority, it almost affects it from the outset. Like, it would almost be better to have, like, I don't know how the mechanics of it work now, but is it sort of like you have your file managers, and they're working on whatever comes in first out. But if you put a priority sticker on something and then you're first in, first out, it's like there needs to be pretty hard timelines still associated with that. Otherwise it is going to be always, it's like, oh, it's 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. It's like you got a non-priority on your desk. It's like, oh.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so maybe to reframe the discussion a little bit, let's think about it less priority, more just a separate stream. So if we think
Rebranding.
yes,
Yeah.
rebranding as a separate stream. Yes.
Yeah.
So we think about if we look, let's take the example of Coquitlam. So Coquitlam has 3 streams in place. One is for transit-oriented development. One is for local builders, and those are kind of in the industry, the jargon of mom and pop applicants who maybe don't have as much experience working through the system. And then the third is everything else. And they're not listed as priorities. We've got 3 streams, and they've organized their staffing to ensure that we got resources here, resources here, resources here. So what it means is that if something comes in on the general stream, we've also got a transit-oriented development, which is really important. It's being worked on without being stuck behind whatever the last thing was in that stream. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the streams are there, but the streams aren't labeled.
Or they'll be labeled, but not as number 1, number 2, number 3. We may not kind of say like, we got to be careful with the branding, because if it's a fast track, then everything else is a slow track, or it's priority, everything else is not priority.
And it does make a difference.
It does for sure. Yes.
Go ahead, Doug.
AI file reviews, you're talking about technology, we're seeing that, the experience of that in Edmonton went quite well.
For sure. Kelowna too.
Yeah, Kelowna, that's right.
Yeah.
Is that on its way in the recommendations under your technology?
It's not in the recommendations, 'cause even in Kelowna, where they got an early jump on it to much fanfare, it's kind of faded a bit.
Yeah.
So I think it's coming for sure. I think it's started to get embedded in our technology platforms. And we see with the city, we use an Amanda technology platform. It's continually being upgraded. I think in the same way, when we go to use our Google search engine, we now see, what do they call their Genie or whatever. Gemini, thank you. Yes, I think we're going to start to see those kinds of things being used as tools by staff for sure.
Questions?
Just a comment for Mark going forward, just to make you aware, the chamber in this year's round of policy work that we're bringing to the BC Chamber AGM. One is around industrial land supply. We're desperately short, so we're suggesting that government takes a look at adding to that. And we've cited your special study area A and B as good opportunities. But the one that I think relates to this, because you've mentioned legislation, is we're asking the province to back off on the heavy-handed legislation that handcuffs municipalities around how targets are reached. We're saying let's let municipalities reach and let's not look at targets, let's look at completions. So how do we get to completions? So we cite some things like mandating density wherever that's going to happen, as opposed to making really thoughtful land assembly without, a new build happening right in the middle of that preempts good density planning. So it's just something that we're working on. It's actually chat more about it. That's awesome. Offline.
That's great. Alex.
I think I'll just, as a comment, add to the general, I think, consensus here of the importance on predictability and speed. From my perspective, this foreclosure, there's a significant uptick in foreclosure, particularly on developers. We will see that continue. A lot of people don't understand quite how long that process takes, and the introduction of secondary and third lenders that gets involved in that process that extends it out further. So I think I'll just, add that as an input that speed and predictability affect not only success, but also build quality, because people really undercut the cost of an extra 6 months of carrying, sure, you can talk about your first loan, but talk about carrying your third loan, 15% or something, right? And so that doesn't just, one, it brings in a significant risk of that developer going under and all your work basically being completely shot. We're seeing that a lot in Ontario.
Yes.
We're starting to see it here, large, high-profile construction companies going into company creditor arrangement. Recently, Whitelock being one of them. And so we really need to think about it from the perspective too that it makes for bad developments, because people near the end of a development are cutting every cost they can, and that affects the citizens of the community who are getting a shoddy product. And then, it goes back to the reputation of the community too, right? And a lot of that will get pinned back on the city, and the city will face the brunt of that blowback.
And Madam Chair, if I may just add to that, thank you first of all for the comment, and I think it's really well put. And I think it's also kind of brings to mind the value of a committee like this, the value of some of the other committees the city has, and also just maybe even other forums that staff from the city and individuals from the development community or the business community can meet regularly to help everybody understand the pressures that each are under. Because I think that really lands when you talk about the financial pressures that delays, whether they're justified or not, can create for development, and how that then has implications for the built product or whether it gets built. That kind of understanding, I think, can be really important. And on the other side too, when we don't get applications that we can process because they're missing this, and this, or they don't meet a certain standard, I mean, we're really in a tough spot. We can't go forward because it's incumbent upon us to ensure that these things kind of meet a certain standard, risks are protected, all that. So that mutual understanding of each other's pressures, I think, can be really helpful.
And just to tack onto that the city should always remember that it's from the perspective of the end consumer, right? Like a lot of times people say, 6 months, whatever this wealthy developer can handle it. Well, their corporate structure is set up where they'll be fine if this development goes under. It's the people who are trying to get that pre-build, right? And that developer goes under, those people get screwed. Like, it's the people in the community who really get hurt by those delays. And sure, developers, I mean, sometimes they do just go under, but like, we can't just look, oh, they can handle an extra year, right?
Yes.
Like,
That's a very good point.
Was there any feedback on the changes or suggested changes to the development inquiry meeting, the DIM meetings? That was everyone speak in support or generally it makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on? I don't want to cut anyone off because there's a lot of really good stuff in here and
Thanks for providing the slides in advance, because it allowed us to absorb the first wave, you know, yeah.
thanks for reading it.
Yeah,
You read
I
it.
think that's our job, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
We
Yeah,
earn our
it-
pay.
It does accurately, I think, capture what I hear from the community as well, and it's sort of, the recommendations or the opportunities are there on the city side, but then also in improving the quality of applications coming in from some of the applicants as well. So I think there's sort of twofold, but, did you have anything you wanted to share before presentation?
No, just, I appreciate the input. Again, this has been going on for just over a year now, and thank you for your input previously and today. This will all be taken into consideration. And I guess it just leads me into the next steps. If I can just buzz through this.
The
Right,
letters
there.
there is really helpful.
So next steps, we shared this same presentation with staff this morning. We're with you folks this morning as well. This afternoon, we're at Development Transportation Infrastructure Advisory Committee. And we're also going to share this with our UDI Liaison Committee next week. This is Alan's work. We now take this work and are going to build an implementation plan. We don't want this just to sit on the shelf. So we're going to be serious about implementing things that are important to us. So there's work being done to work through an implementation plan as far as what can be done quick and easy and a good return on investment. And things that take a little more resources, time and money and effort to implement. And so we're creating a plan that will bring to council as to how we're going to action this, because we really want to make sure that we do action this, as well as other things that maybe fall outside the recommendations as well. And then we'll report back to council, we're hoping in May.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's fast.
it's gonna, yes, we're moving.
Yeah, that's great.
And I will say the first one on that list of implementation is digitizing our application process. We've already started scoping that and resources for that, and we've started that process. So that's a 2025 initiative for us. So today we're just looking, again, thanks for the feedback. The recommendation, if the committee's willing, is to support this as it was presented in general form that Alan shared that report today.
Would anyone like to move the recommendation? By Don, seconded by Jared. Any other final comments or questions on that? All in favor of recommendation? Anyone opposed? I think so. That motion carries. All right.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. Next up is an Energy and Climate Action Program Initiatives Report.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Erin Desotel. I'm the Senior Energy and Climate Action Manager with the city. And I'm happy to be with you today to talk about the work that my team is doing this year. Right. So I think some of you have heard this before, but just a bit of a review of the context of why we do this type of work at the city. So that starts at the international level through the Paris Agreement, and it's informed through recommendations of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. And the IPCC is a nonpartisan United Nations body for assessing global science related to climate change. And then that moves down to nationally through the Pan-Canadian Framework for Clean Growth and Climate Change, provincially through the Clean BC plan, and it is also through our commitment through the BC Climate Action Charter, and that covers both mitigation and adaptation topics. And at the local government level through our official community plan. So a little more on the OCP. This provides the foundation to support compact, complete, and low carbon communities. And it also is where we declare our greenhouse gas or carbon reduction targets. And in working towards these targets, the city has developed plans and strategies to reduce carbon pollution and support climate resilience throughout Abbotsford. Corporately, the 2022 Green Buildings Framework and the 2019 Green Fleet Strategy, these guide our reductions for civic buildings and fleet and help to model climate action leadership to the community. Implementation of these and other plans and strategies is ongoing and guides much of the initiatives the Energy and Climate Action team are advancing. And through Council's strategic plan, this reinforces the city's commitment to sustainability and climate action, and that's highlighted in Principle 2, Sustainable and Safe City. That said, the goals and priority actions throughout the strategic plan provide many other linkages and opportunities to reduce carbon pollution, enhance resilience, and improve energy efficiency. So I've organized today's presentation into 6 areas to highlight some common themes in the work that the Energy and Climate Action team is doing. It's one more area than last year for those of you who were here for this before. So that's resilience and adaptation, high performance buildings, zero emissions mobility, which is the new addition this year, strengthening plans and policies, collaboration and partnerships, and then celebrating progress. So I'll start off with the theme of resilience and adaptation. The climate resilience strategy is a strategic priority action under the Sustainable and Safe City principle. This is a high-level strategy and intends to support the city's role in responding to the increasing climate impacts felt throughout the community. And those have included longer and more intense wildfire season, extreme heat events and drought, and atmospheric rivers. The implications of the new Emergency and Disaster Management, or EDMA, that came into effect in late 2023 will also be considered so that the climate resilience strategy can dovetail into future city emergency management planning as these new regulations are released by the province. This project will also include an update to Abbotsford Community Energy and Emissions Inventory, which tracks our progress in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to meet the targets set out in the OCP. Strong staff guidance will support the project throughout the process, and we'll also be using a low carbon resilience lens to allow the city to look for opportunities to integrate both carbon pollution reduction with preparing for the impacts of climate change. Some key approaches staff are proposing include acknowledging and celebrating the work completed and currently underway under the banner of climate resilience across the city. This project will also leverage progress to build on what's been accomplished through city plans and strategies. And these include things like the Abbotsford Extreme Weather Response Plan, Know Your Hazards Guide, Long-Term Flood Mitigation Strategy, and others. The project timeline includes 4 stages with initial background research and key findings underway. And once the stage is complete, a consultant will be engaged to help us explore options with tasks including internal and external engagement, a climate risk assessment to identify hazards, and then ultimately outlining a strategic approach to supporting community resilience. A draft strategy will then be developed and staff will bring this to council to confirm it aligns with the city's interests and priorities before being finalized by the end of the year. Moving into the theme of high performance buildings and starting with a civic facility, staff are advancing the ARC Heat Recovery and Optimization, or HERO project. Through the HERO project, the mechanical systems of the 3 areas of the Aquatic Center, Ice Rink, and Community Recreation Center will be integrated to make use of heat recovery and sharing that will reduce carbon pollution by over 70% and decrease annual energy use by 40%. This project also improves the accessibility of the pool area. And this is a $10 million project that's also supported by a federal Green and Inclusive Community Buildings grant for just under half of the project's total. A diverse project team includes the project management office, operations, energy and climate action staff, and consultants. If you visited ARC in the last few months, you've likely noted this project is currently in the construction phase and is on schedule to be completed in Q4 of this year. And hopefully you've seen some of the communications materials to make it very clear about what the project is and why the city is undertaking it. So strategic energy management of our corporate assets continues to take place citywide. And this is typically through energy studies, lighting upgrades, and low carbon technology assessments that provide opportunities to embed energy efficiency and GHG reductions into corporate projects. Some projects like the sports field lighting study have recently been completed, while others like the water pump infrastructure study are getting underway. Staff always look for external funding sources to support this work. And the water pump infrastructure study is a good example where BC Hydro is funding 100% of the study cost, and opportunities to leverage additional implementation incentives will be explored as the next step. 2025 brings opportunities to efficiently assess a number of corporate facilities through a bundled approach. And we have 2 of these scheduled for this year that will study 11 buildings in total. Staff have strategically targeted buildings in the city's portfolio with higher GHG emissions to maximize the potential impacts through short and long-term recommendations. And these will be aimed at decarbonizing, improving energy efficiency, and lowering operating costs. And I'll note that the Energy and Climate Action team work closely with operations and facility staff on projects like these to make sure we're identifying and prioritizing opportunities for energy and low carbon improvements. In the community realm, to advance high performance buildings, the city continues to collaborate with partners on education and training for the buildings and development sector. Leveraging the success of training sessions the city has offered since 2021, staff delivered a 3-part series of workshops focused on familiarizing the development community with the zero carbon step code and equipping them with knowledge to operationalize the upcoming building code requirements. These workshops were offered in person in Abbotsford, and partners included BC Hydro, BCIT, the Canadian Home Builders Association of the Fraser Valley, Community Futures South Fraser, and the cities of Chilliwack and Mission. And I'm happy to share that registration was full for every workshop, plus a waiting list. And we were also happy to receive a Industry Partner of the Year award through the CHBA last year for this collaborative work that we engaged in. A final initiative under high performance buildings is the city's work on its first residential retrofit program. This program intends to support residents in reducing their carbon footprint through home decarbonization and energy efficiency improvements. Program design was completed last year and defined the program's 3 overarching goals that you can see. With the help of Archway Community Services, the project team centered equity and engaged community members to help us better understand barriers and challenges when it comes to climate-friendly retrofits. With a solid understanding of program delivery methods and options, staff will assess possible approaches to maximize program impact before providing pilot program options to council. So moving on to the newer category, zero emissions mobility, the city is leading the development of a regional zero emissions mobility strategy that intends to set some achievable goals and provide a high-level roadmap for supporting zero emissions mobility throughout the Fraser Valley. The collaborative project team includes the City of Abbotsford, City of Chilliwack, and the Fraser Valley Regional District, with the 3 local governments providing project funding to match a grant secured through BC Hydro. The strategy will support the work the city is doing to encourage a mode shift towards greater reliance on active transportation, including walking, cycling, and rolling. And it will also provide policy direction to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets that are shared with various levels of government. Direction from the strategy is expected to primarily target encouragement of light duty zero emissions vehicles. So those are like cars, SUVs, and pickup trucks, while also considering zero emissions or e-micromobility technologies like e-bikes and e-scooters. The strategy will explore medium and heavy duty vehicle transitions over the longer term, but we know that's a more difficult sector to target. I wanted to highlight 2 initiatives that are complementary to the zero emissions mobility strategy. And these initiatives also recognize the greater number of zero emissions vehicles that will be on the road in Abbotsford through the implementation of the BC Zero Emissions Vehicle Act. with the provincial sales targets of 100% zero emissions vehicles by 2035. Looking to ensure the city has infrastructure and capacity to support this transition is key to allowing Abbotsford residents, businesses, and visitors efficiently get around the community. So first, staff are looking at opportunities for the city to partner with third-party EV charging infrastructure operators that would provide charging at key locations throughout the city. Some considerations in assessing these providers include reliability, accessibility, customer service, and cost to drivers. Having sufficient electrical capacity at these sites is also an essential factor. So as an example, you may have seen a new EV charging station at the ICBC that's just on the corner of Trethewey and George Ferguson. So this one is operated by BC Hydro, and they've installed 8 DC or fast charging, and then 5 level 2 ports. So it's a good example of how that could roll out in the city with the city. And secondly, staff are working on a non-residential EV ready requirements that will complement those developed by the city for residential developments in 2022. So non-residential includes considerations like industrial and commercial land uses. And these requirements make it more cost effective to install EV charging infrastructure when it is needed down the road. Without having capacity and energy systems integrated when newly built, retrofitting to install EV chargers is significantly more costly. So on the strengthening plans and policies side, there's 4 initiatives I wanted to note today. Starting with the OCP update project. Climate change has been identified as a key challenge impacting residents and the future growth of the city. And the Energy and Climate Action staff are part of the technical advisory group for this update project. And as I mentioned earlier, the OCP establishes GHG reduction targets, and this update provides an opportunity to consider these targets and explore alignment or coordination with those at provincial and federal levels. This project is currently in stage 3, the drafting of policy. Secondly, staff are involved in a BC Hydro funded project that examines challenges and opportunities to improve the provincial energy and emissions data set, which we use to develop our greenhouse gas inventory. This is a less glamorous project, but reliable and high quality data is really important for understanding our community's climate action progress. Energy and Climate Action staff are also part of the Asset Management Steering Committee and involved in discussions around how asset management decision-making considers climate change on the city's substantial inventory of both built and natural assets. And the last initiative is updating 2 policies, the energy policy and the Climate Action Reserve Fund policy. So this update addresses the new requirements and opportunities found in the local government climate action program, which provides annual funding to support the city's climate action efforts. And the energy policy updates are meant to reflect energy management best practices to better support city decision-making and prioritization. And both policies will be brought to council for approval. So moving on to collaboration and partnerships, this is an area where the city does really well and one that Energy and Climate Action staff see as essential to advancing this portfolio in the city. So first, utilities. These are partnerships with BC Hydro and Fortis. They're longstanding, and both utilities actively fund city projects and provide access to peer networks, resources, and training opportunities. We also have co-funding agreements in place to support city staff positions. Secondly, of course, we partner with other local governments, and I mentioned this as part of the STEP code workshops we're working on, as well as the zero emissions mobility strategy. This ensures that we can increase our outreach and align with best practices throughout the region. Last but not least, our collaboration in the community includes organizations connected to building industry education, green economy, and enhancing initiative outcomes through engagement. And we also keep in touch with UFB staff and faculty through the City Studio and Hubbub, which just happened yesterday for those of you who were here for that, and UFB's corporate sustainability team. And this year, the Energy and Climate Action team will be hiring a co-op student for the first time to increase our capacity. And I mention this under this topic because this role will be meant to support engagement throughout the variety of projects that we have on the go and that we know will need engagement to be successful. So the final category is a pretty good way to end, which is celebrating progress. And we do this in a variety of ways. So just a few are highlighted on this slide. Our utility partnerships I spoke to include regular update meetings and presentations to share our efforts and progress and the achievements that we've made. And these updates provide opportunities not only to share those wins, but also the pain points that might be challenging our progress. And having connections and really good relationships with key account managers has proven instrumental in great breakthroughs and opportunities to get unstuck. Finally, since 2017, the city has produced an annual sustainability report, and that lists our climate action and sustainability initiatives and outlines work advanced across a number of areas in many departments, much of which is then reported to the province. Staff bring a report to council in the fall with our annual update on energy and climate action. And that will also coincide with the release of the 2024 Local Government Climate Action Plan survey and the annual sustainability report. Just a few notes on the financial considerations and bringing your attention to the Climate Action Reserve Fund. I spoke about a policy update, but we do have a policy in place already for this. And the initiatives described previously are funded by annual operating budgets as well as through the CARF. And this is intended to support the implementation of carbon neutral projects. So I've mentioned previously that the CARF policy is being updated and guides the use of this fund. And as you can see, there is a healthy balance in the CARF at the moment, though the majority of these funds are already dedicated to projects in the planning and implementation phases. So and with that, I'll just leave you with some questions. If there is anything that you have, any questions outside of this, but anything that you'd like to discuss further. Thank you.
Great. Any questions for Rox?
Yeah, I think it was touched on, but I just wanted to understand better how the climate plan is integrated with development to account for like the potential for an increase in EVs and like particularly making sure that like the grids in new development can handle potentially 100% EV charging, particularly simultaneously with air conditioning, because of course, like we're dealing with both heat waves and an increase in EVs. And I know in some communities, like for example, in some stratified communities, that's actually a trade-off. You have one or the other in the currently the way the grid works.
Yeah, through the chair. I can't answer that on behalf of BC Hydro as the utility providing that capacity.
Right. Okay.
But they, BC Hydro is also aware of that demand that comes through these zero emissions vehicle acts and requirements for the BC building code to increase efficiency, which is often through electrification.
So that's not a requirement that comes from our development department. No, that's totally.
You want to speak to that?
Well,
I thought you were going and I was like, where's Mark?
Okay.
What we do have those is for the zoning bylaw for the fire department. Itself can handle station outside of the grid.
Gotcha.
Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's not something that's really our responsibility to handle, so.
The grid side of it.
Yeah, or maybe we have in place what we can to deal with what's in our capacity.
You identified UFE as a partner, and I know that last I checked, they're developing a district utility plant. Are you aware of an opportunity to do cogen with Abbotsford Center and the university? Kind of similar to the slide you provided on the ARC, of recapturing all the heat that's generated by creating ice can be reutilized and so forth.
Yes, through the chair. Yeah, we do speak about that with the director of sustainability there, and they've made us aware that they're moving forward with the study on that. They're looking for interest from consultants.
Yeah. And then one more comment. I noticed the chamber wasn't listed as a partner, but we have been doing some work with your team. The chamber has contracted the Academy of Sustainable Innovation to create a course, first an e-learning piece and then a kind of an half-day course on helping small businesses become more climate resilient. And Aaron's team, we're actually very involved in developing the curriculum for that, so thank you. And so we're providing that course to our members. We'd love to get city's financial support. We'd offer to all businesses in the community, but I've approached DecDev on that. But yeah, thanks for your help, Aaron, on developing that curriculum. Is really impressive.
Oh, great. To hear.
As soon as you put your hand up, I was thinking,
Yeah.
they're not on the partner.
Yeah, so good.
Susan's video isn't working, but she does have her hand
Oh,
up.
Susan, yeah, I don't see you. So, but yes, you can go ahead, Susan. I'm glad you're online now. I don't know if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Or if you want to put the question in the chat, we could probably read it out. And then maybe in the meantime, I'll go to Craig online. I see your hand is up there.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I just had a question on EV infrastructure. I've been driving electric since 2019, and fortunately, I can charge at home and don't have to have the wonderful experience of trying to find an available charger. But I'm just wondering, particularly given the targets for electrification of vehicles in the next 10 years, what policies are being considered that's going to ensure a more equitable access to EV charging across different neighborhoods, different income levels? Is there any policy that's being considered?
Through the chair. Great question. And that is one of the pieces that the zero emissions mobility strategy will help to guide us towards, because we know that's not only the city is part of that, people move throughout the region and the city. So we want to be looking at that at a regional level. And also we're speaking with Metro Vancouver and the work that they've done on EV policy and EV infrastructure to learn from what they've put together and make sure we have that contiguous transportation corridor between the regions. So that will be something that will be part of that zero emissions mobility strategy.
Do you have a follow-up question, comment?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not a challenge, I guess, for anyone who has, a detached home and can charge easily, but it's more of a challenge, particularly given the amount of housing and multi-unit housing we're going to be developing that might be a bit of a barrier for folks to be able to access EV charging. So definitely something to consider.
Really good point. Alex, did you have something to say about that too?
Actually, yeah, I wanted to build on exactly that point, that I think it should be a priority of the city to make sure that in the new development of particularly multi-unit housing, there are minimum requirements for EV, because to his point about the equitability of access is not just about transportation corridors. Like, I can charge when I'm out of the house. If I live in an apartment building and the only thing I can buy is an EV, I have to be able to charge it.
Yes.
Onto that.
Thank you.
That's a great point. Timeline, year 2 ago, that was added to the zoning bylaw at the department. So it's all the required parking in family that's townhouse or apartment is now required to have an EV ready in public. So they get handle the load, the conduits in place. It's great.
And ready for every single parking stall to install it, or ready to have a charging station?
Ready to have a charging station.
So I mean, that won't be sufficient.
That's up to the developer if they want to include that, or the strata if they want to buy that, but it's the building is built so that it can be easily.
But built so it can be easily added. Like, how many can be easily added? What's the requirement is one per unit. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
So it's not all required or be over parked. Originally, the draft was, should we say every parking stall must be certain? Some buildings are still parking.
Right.
So it's fun for you.
Okay.
And then
Thank
it would be up to the developer at the time to implement it based on sort of what what the sales, like how they would balance that out depending on what they think the need is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Building is designed for an easy addition of that.
So presumably, even if the developer didn't do it, the owner could install it at a later date.
That's ready.
I'll go to Jared first, then Arch, and then I will go back to Susan. I see Tommy's got some.
Oh, so the fund we're speaking about, that's more for like, if when you're starting the application, it's not for like if you're, or not, sorry, when you're developing as opposed to more like existing users, like, so say Don just brought up an electric tractor. Well, there is electric tractors out there now, but it's like, for me to switch to it would just be the fuel savings, but then to bring in all the, like, is it gonna be more like a fund where you can apply? If you want to see that in the community, you know, I want to see more electric tractors driving around in the fields. It's like, well, farmers can't exactly, you know, is it more of what we want to see? Like, kind of, is it a fund we can apply for as opposed to it being just kind of, well, when you build, we'll do, you know, we require this, or we'll, you know, give some money for that kind of. So it kind of makes sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, through the chair, just, I think
Sorry.
you're clarifying the Climate Action Reserve Fund.
Yeah,
and mentioning
yeah.
What that's used for.
Mhm.
So that's used by the city to support projects in a variety of ways. So that's part of what some of the update to the policy is to clarify the use for corporate versus community versus research projects versus staffing. So kind of what those needs are. So it's not a grant source
Yeah.
per se for the community.
There's no city managed grant for that upcoming or forthcoming, because like,
Yeah, through the chair, not for something like that, like those large infrastructure, like medium or heavy duty EVs. I know that there is some funding usually available at that federal level
yeah,
for that.
it's nice if you can get it. They're expensive.
They are.
Sorry,
Even solar on.
they are,
Well-
it's all very, it's not.
Speaking of, we, I'll have to talk to you after about that, because we did put solar panels on one of our chicken gardens last year, and it's like fairly significant amounts covered through federal. So there's opportunities. I'm gonna have to share with you. Yes.
I can talk about that.
Yes, because I understand the feasibility is not necessarily always there unless there's support. So, Don, you had a comment or question?
First did, I think.
Oh, sorry, Arch.
Yeah, so solar and grants, is there anything put in place by the city of Abbotsford for incentives for new builders to use solar panels on buildings or homes or anything that they're putting out?
Through the chair, I would definitely direct you to BC Hydro and their battery storage and solar panel funding that is available. That's only been available for a short amount of time. So there is some opportunities there through the utilities to do that, but currently not with the city.
No, the city. And sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
you said there's a charging station that went up ICBC and there's a couple more coming. Do we know the locations of those in Abbotsford yet, or?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of what the other ones are through ICBC or through BC Hydro, but just that one was there. I had seen it and then I just followed up to ask about it. But BC Hydro is actively looking for opportunities throughout the province to improve the EV charging accessibility.
I'll actually go down to Susan, because I know she's
Oh,
got
yeah.
hers in the chat. Tammy's, I think, is going to read her question or comment.
So Susan Minkis just commented saying sorry that she's having tech issues with video and sound. She's been online for the past 40 minutes and she really appreciates the presentation. She also wanted to thank Craig for noting engagement with UFV and the Office of Sustainability, and to please let her know if you need any support. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, Alex got a question as well?
Yeah, so we just heard that the city is for doing revisions to its development proposal applications, and particularly they're looking at implementing different streams. The city considered a environmentally friendly stream, right? Like some form of priority on a developer who is interested in an environmentally friendly development. They may be putting solar directly onto a new build. They may be having green space on the roof of an apartment building, like the type of things we see in larger cities having had success. You know, it seems like a prime opportunity, we were already overhauling and looking at streaming. Sorry, I think all my questions are for you.
That's a good question. So that's to Alan Gibson. I think that could form part of Home's work. It's important too. We haven't done that. What are strategies kind of identify that when you're talking about environment, something else? It's always the idea of fast. My experience in the past is you fast track, it becomes the track, and everything else is sort of falling behind trying to that. Very carefully. That could form part of that discussion, streaming, application.
Yeah.
We have not done.
I mean, I hope that council will consider, at the Grant Thornton's Community Futures event, we talked a lot about what we wanted the future of Abbotsford to look like. And we identified faster development, but we also identified that we didn't want to just rapidly build out a community, right, to house a bunch of people without really putting a lot of thought into it. We wanted to build a community that still felt like the Fraser Valley, a community that still implemented what we have, which is a community that's in nature. And we wanted to see development that took that into consideration. And oftentimes development, especially in a tight economic climate, it's just about the cheapest development that you can put up, unless it's the role of a city to put barriers in place that require a developer to be more mindful about planning their developments around green space, around solar, around those types of things. So that's something I hope council will consider when they're talking about approving these plans.
One thing. In context of all that, the city has housing targets imposed on us. So we have to do things better, faster. And that really, unfortunately, has just turned into an accounting. It's just how many units now put we can get. So that has to contextualize anything around. The provincial government set that mandate for us. Something to think about in the background when we're setting those priorities.
Yeah, I would share that it's been a concern as well. Like I've heard it from other municipalities, the council members also, that there's direction with these housing targets from the other levels of government, but there's not really on the other side. We talk about tree protection and other things. We're not seeing that balance. So it's something that's not there, but I would encourage you to also share those concerns with other people as well, because that's not what we hear a lot of. So it gets hard to balance it out.
You can lean on our legal department too, to strategically interpret statutes, which largely build boxes that are much larger than we originally think they are.
Good comments, though. You're talking about building intentional community. Desert, nature.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Don, did you have something?
Just quickly,
Yeah.
to follow on to your, it costs more. I built a step 5 house, one of the first in Abbotsford, and it was 24% more than if I was just to build a regular house. That's freaking expensive if we're trying to build affordable homes, right? So we got this balance of what we're going to do. So that's interesting. And then the other one was one of your slides, and I didn't see a slide number, so I couldn't write it down. Define the province's defined climate resilience, the box, et cetera.
Secretariat. It's from their secretariat.
Yeah. And in there, obviously, flood mitigation was hugely mentioned in the report, et cetera. And then the province says they have other priorities other than helping us to do the fund for the flooding. So is that in your department now, that climate resiliency? How are we going to get that? I don't care where the money comes from, but I know the pain and suffering that our community went through, the nation went through. And so we can do all these little tweaks, which are really, really important. I'm not discounting that. But if we end up with another lake where, as I don't know if you experienced it, but so many of my friends lost millions of chickens and full herds of cattle. You know, you don't want to take cattle out of a rafter. I don't want to ever see that again. It's disgusting. But you know what I mean? Is this under your purview now?
No. It looks like Mr. Coney would like to.
Hi, Mr. Coney, how are you?
Thank you, Chair. It is under the engineering umbrella. So we have a separate team member who's overseeing both flood recovery and flood mitigation, long-term flood mitigation. And the latter is really focused on the long-term solution with Sumas Prairie. So we have made some progress there. You recall a year or so ago, there was a grant from the province to fortify the Barrowtown flood station, $8. That's just really one small step.
What a step.
It's a step. We're needing to work with the province to establish a concept that is in line with the province and also the local First Nations are on board with. So that's really the table that we're at right now. And hoping to
Federally and provincially, or just?
It's primarily provincial. So much federal involvement. We also have involvement with the Trans-Boundary Initiative where we're in talks with United States, because obviously that's where the water comes from, but mindful.
They're busy.
Of other things going on for sure. Having said that, you know, it's not an area that we have full control over. So sort of a two-pronged approach, continue to work on that side, but also look at what are we going to do if the water continues to come over. It's large events. It is definitely a long-term play and it's significant dollars, as you alluded to. I believe for concept was $1.6 to $3 billion. Yeah. Fairly significant endeavor for local government, but
I don't mind a tax increase of 2.5%, but 25% is going to be painful.
It's to your point, it's not sustainable for local government. It involves higher levels of government support, but also the local First Nations who obviously have they're right there in the Sumas Prairies. They're a key part of this discussion as we find a long-term solution.
So do you want to add to that, Craig?
Yeah, just another comment from the Chamber's perspective. We're also submitting a policy in this realm to advocate the province's recent announcement. It's a low priority. We're saying this is a high priority. This is affecting citizens, it's affecting food security and our major supply chain transportation routes. So and we already have a policy at the Canadian Chamber level that's been accepted. So we're trying to keep the pressure on for the province to pony up.
I think I feel like what Nathan's comments are, you did a great job explaining what you're doing, but there's a lot of stuff going on under his umbrella, behind the scenes as well. So
it's going to continue to stay under here rather than.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And rest assured, they're working very hard as well on that. So I don't want to have the impression that it's just a different department and not a priority as well. And then I guess my one question sort of along those lines is the reserve funds that are under your umbrella that are in there. Is it correct that the majority of those are from granting where those funds need to be there for specific programming or initiatives, like the reserve funding that's in there, or can they be reallocated to other areas of the city?
Yes, Madam Chair, it's the Climate Action Reserve Fund Management Policy tells us how those funds can be used. And primarily it's to support carbon neutral projects. So if a project is identified, then we look at how it's supporting the city in achieving our OCP targets or reducing our community greenhouse gas emissions targets. So in terms of allocating, they can be reallocated, but within what's within that policy in terms of carbon neutral projects.
And the funding is it from BC Hydro? Like I know you have them on the various slides, but it would be fair to say that the majority of them are through BC Hydro and other granting programs? The majority is through the provinces. Previously it was the CAREP program. I can't even remember what it was, but there was an old program that's been replaced by the local government climate action program. Great. Any other closing remarks before we move on? Great. There's no recommendation, so thank you for answering our questions. And the last report is annual report, and Robin.
Check with you.
Yeah.
Are you good?
I think we're good.
I
know we have someone
Oh,
meeting.
sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, Robin, nothing personal.
Yeah, no offense taken.
Yeah. Well,
Fewer questions if I leave.
I think I'm confident that everyone read the report, so we can just move through it fairly quickly and then some time for any of the questions.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm Robin McLeod. I'm the Director of Building Permits and Licenses in the Planning Department. So I just quickly wanted to go through our 2024 annual report for Planning and Development Services. And I think you all received the report already. So this is just highlighting a few of the go through on the slides. So the city received more development applications in 2024 than any other year since 2021. Applications picked up in the second half of the year following council's adoption of the SMOO bylaws. The pickup has largely been in applications and infill rezoning subdivision after the first half of the year, when many applicants appeared to be waiting and seeing what the city was going to do with the SMOO legislation. Not included in the graph are the other types of application, which are like DP exemptions for natural environments, steep slopes, strata conversions. Land development applications received. So multifamily remains strong. 6-story wood frame apartments are the most common form of apartments that the city is seeing. And we've received an application for a 30-story high rise within the city center neighborhood plan. As you'll see in some of the upcoming slides, 2024 was a record-breaking year for residential approvals in Abbotsford. As a result, in the first time in 3 years, the number of residential lots and units in stream has begun to roll over. So in-stream multifamily units declined for the first time in several years, which was a result of the city having approved several large projects in 2024, including 130 townhouse units in the U District, 190 townhouse units at Cooper Farms, and we had 491 apartments across High Street Mall and 300 apartments at the Red Robins site in City Center. Single family picked up slightly with some large subdivision submitted. 2024 in West Abbotsford, there was on Bergham Street, 45 duplex lot units at Cooper Farms and 125 lots proposed as part of the next phase of Augustin. The number of in-stream units does still remain high, with external factors such as the market and costs likely impacting the ability for projects to get off the ground. A few projects to mention here. Berkman Mill Lake, the 6-story apartment building there. Lots of interest around Marshall and McCallum, the Horizon Street project, and the Rail District apartment project. We saw a decline in 2023 ICI applications. However, we're still well above the 5-year average. Industrial remains the largest contributor to the amount of floor space. So it's good for the local economy and jobs. Two notable projects here. The Huntingford Properties Industrial Development on Mount Lehman, totaling 85,000 square meters of floor space, and a new Toyota dealership near High Street. 2024 was the biggest year for residential approvals on record, more than doubling any of the previous 5 years. Over 75% of approved housing in 2024 was apartment. Approximately 17% was townhouses, and 92% of all housing approved in 2024 was multifamily. So two notable projects here, 419 apartment units across from High Street Mall, and 130 townhouse units in the U District. A big decline from 2023, which was particularly big year for industrial development.
Planning doesn't approve many applications for institutional uses because they're not typically subject to a DP. However, there were two significant projects where a variance was required. So at MEI received a variance for both height and parking requirements. They also completed an ACL application for non-farm use. And Northview Community Church received a height variance to accommodate larger congregating space. Two projects of note here. The new industrial building on Iron Mills Court and the mixed-use building with over 800 square meters of ground floor commercial in the Rail District. 2024 continued to trend of fewer issued building permits over the previous year, with 2024 coming in slightly below the 5-year average. Looking at issued permits by type compared to 2023, we exceeded last year's total for multifamily, institutional, and industrial. Commercial, industrial, and other categories like signs, swimming pools, etc., are generally in line with 2023. Agricultural and single-family permits are down quite a bit. Breakdown of new residential units by type. New townhouse and apartment units exceed the 5-year average. New single-family units were up relative to 2023. A breakdown of the ICI and agricultural floor area by type. Institutional floor area far exceeded any other year. This was primarily due to UFP's expansion with student housing. Commercial floor space was right about the 5-year average, while industrial exceeds the 5-year average. And agricultural was down. We saw high construction values in 2024, a significant increase of 340 million over 2023. Multifamily, industrial, and institutional being the biggest contributors. Both multifamily and industrial saw less dwelling units and floor space approved in 2023, but much higher construction costs. High construction costs are likely part of the story here, as well as the complexity of the projects. A few notable projects, Vitalis Industrial Development on Mount Lehman, totaling 185 million. UFV expansion, including new housing, totaling 1.1 million. That gave us 398 new beds. And the mixed-use development in City Center on a future commercial street, totaling 26.5 million and 134 new residential units. Sharing here some of the project initiatives in 2024. Of course, we have the OCP update, the D3 project continuing through. Community planning has been working on a variety of housing projects. The commercial truck parking strategy, which was presented at council yesterday, and the development application review process, which we had a presentation just a few hours ago. The city submitted the first annual housing target progress report to the province last year. The reporting period runs from October 1st to September 30th. 602 net new completed units during year one reporting period. 817 units were issued VP during the reporting period. And 1,262 units were granted rezoning and or DP approval during this period. So as of September 30th, 2024, there were another 2,687 units within the approved in principle category. And that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions?
Great. Yeah. Questions or comments? Members.
I'm impressed on the progress you're making towards that year 5, 7,200. Realize we're that far along. It's good.
And approvals, yeah.
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 Like I said, we need completions.
Please,
Yeah.
what is your?
Well, that's just important subtle distinction. What so the shared report is what we're than that first bar of occupancy, the rest are issued building permits or issued development. That doesn't mean shovels in the ground, so first measure by occupancy. Of course, down the road, that development process holding. So what we're trying to do here is demonstrate what is in City Hall and in our control, what could turn into construction projects. Yes, housing targets are measured by occupancy. So things that was being approved today, take years to build, will be occupied in 2 years. Year 4 and 5 of the housing targets.
Hopefully not too many developers in it, really up.
Yeah, Alex?
Are there penalties from the province, or what happens if you don't hit the target?
Good questions to the chair. What we have to do is we do annual reporting to the province on not only the number of units, but also what we're doing processes, application process. Updates to our CP, which gives courthouse. So they take all those things into consideration. They feel like a municipality is not meeting their targets or not making an effort to move towards. They then will appoint an advisor to help you with.
Yes. Very exciting stuff. Yeah, go ahead, Arch.
If a development's taking longer and it's not completed in its time frame, does that reflect back on the city when it comes to your targets? For example, I know the high street apartments that you're talking about, it's a year and a half behind completion, the estimated date. So does that fall back on you guys and your targets, or is that just the developer in them?
Well, that falls back onto our targets. There's slower construction. It's part of conditions. Decide to slow down. States that affects targets.
The report, that's where the bar graph is, that we're up above with approvals, but that actually doesn't count towards meeting your targets. The actual target number is the lower number. So it would say, I think it was 53% or so is what we're at, but in the meantime, the approvals have been fourfold in some areas. So we are moving it, but at that point, it's no longer, we have no control over the next step of the process.
Yeah.
Well, we have influence, but maybe, but depends who you talk to. So,
Exactly.
Craig, online, do you have a comment or question?
I just have a question. I was just looking at the issued building permits between new residential and industrial, commercial, institutional, and even the institutional spike that we had there, I guess, was housing at UFE. But is there any concern from a land use strategy perspective of the decrease in commercial floor area approvals? Is the city concerned about the balance between the residential and any employment generating land use?
Great question. Slides again, but it's an interesting point into what Greg spoke about earlier. We have to see for employment lands in the city. We are starting to see a downward trend in activity in ICI, primarily industrial. From a land capacity perspective, by 2005, the city got an additional 445 acres removed from the ALR for industrial growth. And as that land is rezoned, we keep an account of how much of it is rezoned. We have roughly about 50 acres left of that 445. If you net out environmental areas, we're down to somewhere around like 35 acres. That has not been rezoned for industrial growth. We are at a point for sure where additional employment lands are going to be needed as we grow to a population of 200 to 250,000 people. So it is a concern and it is a priority, but this definitely is going to require ongoing advocacy at senior levels of government. Chamber, thankfully, it's a big champion.
Alex.
On that note though, like is research also being done on like the transition of this community to a community with the expansion of the number one and also the impact of vast increasing quantity of virtual work. So statistics from even 5 years ago on the balance between commercial, industrial, and residential housing would be largely out of date.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the highway widening for one, well, Abbotsford is not really a commuter community today.
No.
With census data, 65% work here, or live here, work here. That's a high statistic, particularly the highest. So that's where now the technology starts to play a role for sure. You're seeing that on the side, commercials. How many of us now examine product versus what we've written? That trend, of course, is continuing to see commercial decrease. On the industrial side, that's a land component that's needed. So that's not going away. That's something we really have to sit on. The other component is agri-tech. We're a big ag community, and there's much more to agriculture than technology and research and development aspects of processing. That's something we also want to lean into, better understand and make sure that we're supporting the ag community, the ag tech community.
Do you have a follow-up comment to that? I think also it's an issue that I would just maybe mention that other communities are looking at. It's something that in Langley and I think the chamber would also agree because I see their advocacy they're doing this. Hope their coalition is how they're doing it. So it's not just for City of Abbotsford, but other areas. So also coming at it with the perspective of what's available in the entire Fraser Valley, I think is important too, because we may not be responsible for everything in Abbotsford, but can we make sure that it's balanced across the region will be more important, just to your point about travel and things like that. But Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, just highlighting how manufacturing plays into this, as highlighted in the tariff communications. We know now we have over 300 manufacturing organizations here in Abbotsford. Not surprising with them moving east out of Vancouver, Lower Mainland. And so with respect to that, there's more manufacturing coming. And are there opportunities as we see the downfall of some retail, large retail, of converting that to light industrial or other uses that might create the employment land or fill the employment land needs?
Yeah, that's a great point, Craig. And as that retail or that commercial space starts to shift something different, what is that? We've been watching for that and waiting for that to come our way to see what does that look like. The OCP today kind of has some policy around allowing some indoor industrial areas and some commercial designated areas. Big box in this way. That hasn't really, maybe as technology changes, maybe there's other commercial enterprises that could. What that is, I'm not sure.
Because they often you fall into the tyranny of the urgent. So we know our offices in Seven Oaks, and we know there's a time limit there on our lease and future redevelopment. So I guess what I'm suggesting is if there's such an urgent need in industrial, looking at industrial conversion versus giving large retail areas over to residential. Because there's a lot of that development happening. I turn a mall into residential with ground floor commercial retail. But like if you look at a Rona location, great opportunity for industrial.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good example where adding industrial to that type of neighborhood would be viable. Some of these areas around here, for example, there's a land economics that starts to influence how redevelopment may or may not. Residential certainly is the top of the food chain.
Mentioned ag, mentioned ag tech. It's like, I just feel it's necessary to reinforce that having service providers local is essential for farmers. Like there's a lot of it's already hard enough to get parts for your equipment. It's harder enough to get them to the dealership than to have to go to whatever dealership it is, to wherever you have to get them from is always, another challenge too, especially moving around. It's not that you don't really have an Amazon for tractors. Tractors are there's not really that online order.
Point. All right, I think then we'll, there's no recommendation for this report, so we'll just move along. And then I think in the interest of time, I'll go straight to adjournment. I know we've used up all of our time for today. But if there is any other pressing issues or any percolating in the community, or for those who are here, if there's something that you want to chat about after the fact that should be brought forward to this table, please let me know. And we are not meeting again until June 12th. So I'm glad we were able to kind of get through these big reports now. I'll look for a motion that the meeting be adjourned. Alex and Craig Toes in the room, all in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everyone on June 12th.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.